Good afternoon and welcome to Nova Southeastern University Shark Chats. We have an interesting presentation today, very much on sleep, which is something we've all been having fun with. My colleagues Christine and Lily, will you self-introduce?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, my name is Christine Nunez. I am a Senior Associate Director for the College of Psychology. I work in the Department of Recruitment and Admissions. Welcome.
And Lily?
Hi everyone, my name is Lily Bigner. I am an admissions counselor here in the Graduate College of Psychology at the Davie Fort Lauderdale campus.
Okay. And Christine, you want to go ahead and start with the introduction?
Yes, of course. All right, well, welcome everyone. Today we have Dr. James Tim McKenna. He's an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience here at Nova Southeastern University. He brings extensive expertise in neuroscience, sleep-wake regulation, and neurophysiological methods. Dr. McKenna earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago and his PhD from Florida Atlantic University. Before joining Nova Southeastern University, Dr. McKenna spent many years at Harvard Medical School and the VA Boston healthcare system, where he served as a research scientist in the Department of Psychiatry and as an associate professor of psychiatry. His research focuses on how neural circuits and neurotransmitter systems regulate the sleep-wake cycle, arousal, and related EEG rhythms. His work uses advanced techniques, including optogenetics, chemogenetics, neuroanatomy, electrophysiology, and behavioral analysis in animal models.
Lily?
Thank you, Christine. Dr. McKenna also introduces students to cutting-edge STEM approaches in psychology and neuroscience, demonstrating how research methods can reveal the relationships between brain activity and behavior. With deep experience in both neuroscience research and teaching, he really stands at the intersection of foundational brain science and educational mentorship.
Okay. Well, thank you. Dr. McKenna, the show's yours.
Okay, then. So first off, thank you, Dr. Perez and the college for having me. This is quite exciting. So my name's Dr. McKenna. I'm relatively new at Nova Southeastern. I came in August of this year, into the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience and having a great time since. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to talk about, kind of the steer of what I've been trying to do in my science, the laboratory. But a bigger picture is I'm going to try to instill with you excitement about the field of sleep research. What I will be presenting to you today is not strictly things I've done in the laboratory, but certainly a description of what's been happening in the field and some exciting new findings, hopefully that I have a little part. Okay, so opening new paths to brain healing through sleep science. All right, where do we begin? Sleep is a criminal waste of time. A life of leisure and a life of laziness are two things. There will be sleeping enough in the grave. And certainly, as Margaret Thatcher puts it, sleep is for wimps. So why do I begin this lecture with these quotes? They seem to be counterintuitive of me trying to get the point across that sleeps may be important. And the reason why is because these luminary figures, these historical figures, maybe weren't informed. They maybe didn't have the information and maybe some importance of why we sleep. And in the last 50 years, a lot of really exciting scientists has figured out that sleep is really crucial for brain maintenance. I started in the field of sleep research around the year 2001. Around 1999 to 2003, major findings in sleep really kind of knocked it over the edge, made it really exciting. One was figuring out that adenosine, the metabolite, adenine triphosphate, is actually something that is a neuromodulator that can cause sleepiness. So the idea is if you break it down an energy molecule, you have a metabolite, and the net thing that metabolite does is it acts as an inhibitor and starts inhibiting the excitatory activity in the brain that may be responsible for arousal. Then there was the discovery of orexin by two different groups, one in Texas and one in California. Orexin being pretty much a new neurotransmitter that was discovered. And certainly soon after that, it was determined that is the core reason why you have narcolepsy with cataplexy is a lack of orexinergic neurons. And then lastly, there was two different groups that found that there were some sleep active areas in the brain, in particular preoptic region. Both groups, Saper and Scammell at Harvard, as well as McGinty and Smuziak at UCLA. So there were these three really groundbreaking findings, and the field kind of took off. Not saying that there wasn't work previously, but certainly that's where the excitement, in my opinion, really kind of kicked into fifth gear. So this is the modern science that we have now. And what I've described to you basically is the idea that sleep is a biologically active state. Your brain doesn't just turn off when you sleep. It does something different. So it can, in the last 30 years or so, there's a lot of back and forth trying to pin down what is the function of sleep. Not really the central focus of what I'm talking about today, but I think it is important to go over a few of these functions. So sleep is pretty much when the brain is repairing and restoring itself after the demands of the day. You know, things like metabolism, energy use, et cetera, et cetera. Deep non-REM sleep has been shown to strengthen learning and some types of memory. Non-REM sleep has been shown, and this is maybe one of the more recent exciting findings, that non-REM sleep clears waste from the brain. It's called the glymphatic flow or the glymphatic system. And this also fine-tunes connections between brain cells, the non-REM sleep. REM sleep helps the brain process these, experience, and store. It seems there's some dispute about this, but most recently it seems in the field, at least effective memories are maybe being consolidated during REM sleep. And let's just keep in mind when sleep is poor, that we're going to talk a lot about today, these systems become less stable, the neural systems. And then in fact, this can impact things like mood, cognition, memory, and certainly the role that sleep plays in restoration of the brain. So as you heard, I was in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School for many years, and sometimes people are like, well, you're a sleep studier. Why are you in the Department of Psychiatry? And it turns out it's a two-way street that's very important when we're considering things like psychiatric and neurological illness and related sleep dysfunction. So sleep problems are common across many of the brain and mental health conditions. The term I'll use today is called psychopathologies. So this is including neurological and psychiatric disorders. Poor sleep has been shown to heighten emotional reactivity and reduce the brain's ability to regulate things like mood and stress. As I mentioned just now, disruptive sleep may interfere with this nightly cleaning system of the brain called the glymphatic clearance. Now, this is where the brain actually will be clearing such things as metabolic waste and certain toxic proteins, say, for instance, things like phosphorylated tau and beta amyloid. So in turn, disruptive sleep not only may be impacting this glymphatic flow, but also it may contribute to increased neuroinflammation. When sleep is chronically disturbed, such as maybe what you see in some of these disorders, many things can be impaired. Things like cognitive control, attention, memory, decision-making declines. And then over time, this disordered sleep, it's kind of chasing its own tail. It's a process that can maybe get worse and worse and worse. And the thing is, it also contributes to all these other symptoms you see in these disorders. So the symptoms may worsen because of things like the sleep disruption, and this maybe slows recovery that you're maybe trying to see in a number of these psychopathologies. So what's our lab's mission? We're trying to harness sleep to improve brain health. So we're trying to understand if you improve sleep, and I'll go into some of the details of how we're trying to do that, can you enhance the brain recovery that you want to see in these certain psychopathologies? So we develop and test behavioral, pharmacological, neurostimulation sleep interventions, all sorts in these animal rodent models. We measure changes in behavior that are mirroring these psychopathology symptoms. We're looking at the neurobiology and certainly the activity. And as well, most recently, we're very interested in the brain repair mechanisms. So our goal is to translate from what we're finding to practical real-world treatments that may improve the outcomes in these different neurological and mental health conditions. So this is where we land. So as I'm depicting here, I have some example psychopathologies on the left. Let's skip this for a second and go to symptom outcomes. So in a number of psychopathologies, let's look at some major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, related dementias, brain injury like TBI. There's a slew more of these diseases we can list here. I just want to give you some examples. So usually when you have a description of these diseases, you can have a list of symptom outcomes. Under symptom outcomes, you usually have listed as one of the outcomes sleep disturbances. And my proposal to you and what's being done in our field right now is we pull that out and we're going to make that an intermediary. And what I mean by that is you have a number of common sleep disturbances. Can you start addressing these sleep disturbances and in turn improve the outcomes of these other symptoms that are maybe listed? So, if you have common sleep disturbances that we see with a lot of these psychopathologies, things like insomnia, fragmented sleep, diminished slow wave deep sleep, which is particularly important for restoration, altered REM sleep, circadian rhythm disruption, hyperarousal, nighttime stress, and certainly in certain cases, for instance, with obstructive sleep apnea, you may actually have, sleep disordered breathing and hypoxia. Now, if we have these symptom outcomes and we start targeting these sleep disturbances with tools we have to improve the sleep profile, what's going to happen to those symptom outcomes? And what I propose to you here that's very important is that we're going to see improvement. Now, traditionally, when you're treating a lot of these psychopathologies, you're treating these individual outcomes, these symptoms, right? But what's exciting here is sleep disturbance is a shared biological pathway that we're seeing through so many of these psychopathologies. And the idea is that sleep-focused care may be a systems level shift in mental health treatment. If we get to the bottom and fix some of these sleep disturbances, we may see multiple symptom outcomes improve. So that's what that's what the laboratory is trying to tackle. That we're going to evaluate these sleep interventions and improvement of these symptoms, and we're particularly doing it in the rodent models of brain disease. So at this point, before moving on, I realize this is a shark chat. I'm willing to take around 5 minutes of questions real quick, maybe, just before we go to the next little set of slides. So, Christine or Lily, are there any questions to maybe field at this point?
At this point, we would welcome any questions in the chat, anything that might be on your mind.
Lily, you have one question in there?
Yes, I see our first question
Great.
is, do you have any recommendations for people struggling to sleep because of PTSD?
Well, 2 things. First off, I have to make a statement. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a physician. I am a basic sleep researcher. So what that means is take with what I say with a grain of salt in the sense that I am not an actual, doctor who should be addressing sleep issues. Now, in general, PTSD, that gets a little complicated. And one thing that's very prominent in PTSD in particular is, reoccurring traumatic nightmares. Now, how do you treat that? Well, there's a number of ways to do it. It seems like across the board, when it comes to anything that's somewhat, insomnia related, the best bet is cognitive behavioral therapy specific to insomnia. I believe there may be even a specific one to PTSD insomnia, but, I may be wrong. So that's usually your first shot off the bow. Also, you have to be addressing things like sleep hygiene. So the idea that you want to be very regulated and when you go to bed and when you wake up. And then from there, it gets pretty complicated with PTSD because, the idea is things like, you have abnormal fear extinction, et cetera, et cetera. One fascinating thing that I know some people have actually been trying to employ as a therapy is lucid dreaming. Now, lucid dreaming is the idea that you can actually become aware in your dreams. And if it's very strong lucid dreaming, you can actually take control of the dreams. So I am aware of individual cases. I've read a few papers where they're actually trying in therapy to induce lucid dreaming in these PTSD patients, and they can actually maybe take somewhat control of the content of the dreams, which maybe alleviates some of what is, I think it's one of the chief complaints of the sleep and PTSD is these traumatic and reoccurring dreams in particular. Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
The next question posted in the chat is if someone has problems sleeping, such as being scheduled for working the night shift and having difficulty sleeping during the day, do you have any tips for something like this?
Oh, well, that's a good one to tackle. So, I mean, one of the things that's really on the radar of sleep research in general is this idea of, say, for instance, shift work. Because, we're well aware, or maybe we aren't well aware, I'll tell you, we have circadian rhythmicity in us. So we have these zeitgebers in our environments that trigger certain things to pretty much regulate our 24-hour day. The number one zeitgeber is light. In particular, in the morning light, which is very blue heavy, is very arousing. In fact, one of the best things you should do when you wake up in the morning is get that light going as soon as possible. So the idea with something like shift work is that is all right. That, you're working the night, you're driving home with the sun rising when you're supposed to be calming down and going to sleep. And it's actually the opposite that's occurring because these triggers are the zeitgebers. So the complications you see with shift work are pretty prominent, especially when you start looking at certain types of rhythms of hormones in the body. So things like, say, cortisol and melatonin. And it's not that you don't see the profile over 24 hours of these hormones necessarily, but they're very diminished in amplification. So there are a number of things you can do, and we're going to go over some of these things that you can do to maybe improve sleep that can be lifestyle based. Things like when do you exercise? Things of regularity of when you sleep and when you wake up. The use of artificial light in particular may be important for someone who's doing shift work. A light that's maybe blue heavy. There's all these things like that. And then there's, of course, things like, say, supplementation of melatonin, although long-term use, I'm not sure of that, but certainly can help you get to sleep short term. So let's get through what we're about to go through, because we're going to touch on a number of these things coming up when we're talking about sleep treatments. But it's a great point that in particular with shift work, it's a natural experiment of sorts, trying where you are disrupting their circadian rhythm and you can see some consequences. And there are many consequences: cardiometabolic, increased incidence in cancers, I believe. Yeah, the shift work is really a fascinating thing to be studying. So okay, so let's move on. We have more time for questions coming up. So where I last left you, we were talking about, can we address these sleep interventions? We're kind of changing the paradigm, and we're going to go after the sleep disruption with different types of treatments and see if maybe we have some symptom outcomes that are going to be beneficial. So what if instead of treating these individual symptoms of the different psychopathologies, what if we amplify the brain's own repair system? So this is just one example I'm giving you here. So on the left, we have brain injury. So in brain injury, we see a number of sleep disturbances. We can see insomnia. We can see daytime hypersomnia, which is excessive daytime sleepiness, which may be a result from the insomnia. Circadian instability. So that's the idea when you go to sleep and when you wake up. When are you more versus less active? Are you more active during the daytime and less active during the nighttime? Fragmented sleep. This is the idea that your sleep bouts themselves become shorter and shorter and shorter. and chronic slow wave sleep alterations. And the thing about slow wave sleep is a certain type of sleep called delta sleep. And we'll go over that a little bit more, but it's 0.5 to 4 hertz sleep. It's the deepest stage in non-REM sleep, stage 3. It is the key player. It is the one that's going to give you the most restoration and the most maintenance. So here with TBI, for instance, you have these chronic slow wave sleep alterations. So if we have different brain injury symptoms, things like mood instability, cognitive slowing, the fatigue, the headaches, the prolonged recovery, particularly, can we target the sleep disturbances? And what would we predict? Maybe improved mood, enhanced cognition, reduced pain and fatigue, and accelerated can help the recovery. So we're testing a number of different approaches. For instance, in brain injury, then we're going to be looking at things like that glymphatic flow, which, I'm not sure it's in the most elegant way to describe it, but just think of your brain as a toilet, and the glymphatic flow is the flush, the system, the plumbing. If it clogs, what happens? You have a buildup in the toilet. So we want that to flow. We want that to flow smoothly. And when it does, it's going to clean out things like metabolites, toxic proteins, etc., which need to be cleared. There's chronic and neuroinflammation. There's plasticity that may be impacted with sleep disruptions that may be improved with the treatment of the sleep disturbances. And then in turn, improved cognitive and emotional resilience. So just going back to this last question, this is some of those very things we were talking about when we were talking about shift work. The idea, can you naturally optimize sleep? Now, we know there's drugs out there and different treatments, but these are the natural things that, you today going home can do. The goal is to reduce hyperarousal and protect that slow wave sleep I was just talking about, that delta wave sleep. That's so important for your brain's maintenance and the restoration. So these are just examples. There's more out there. Stabilize the clock. There's your circadian rhythmicity. Consistent sleep-wake timing, the number one thing in my opinion. If you're going to sleep at different times at night and waking up at different times in the morning, your body has more of a challenge to regulate itself. And there's consequences for that. But if you stick to a very strict bedtime, a very strict time waking up in the morning, you may see some improvements. Morning light, like I mentioned, reduced evening blue light. So when the sun is first coming up in the day, you know how white light is with the sun? So it's got the different colors, the different wavelengths, right? Blue light is strongest in the morning. So that's why it's maybe the most arousing, okay? And what does it do? It's going to suppress that melatonin and keep you aroused. Protect that deep sleep. Things like aerobic exercise, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The idea that exercise can certainly promote good sleep. Towards the end of the day, maybe good stress wind down routines, maybe a bit of stretching, maybe not too rigorous of exercise though, because that gets certain hormones and things pumping. And certainly the CBTI, which I talked about, the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Optimize your environment, cool, dark bedroom, temperature, huge important. Some people like white noise to reduce awakenings. Pink noise is a newer one where it's more lower frequencies. And it may help, although I did just read an article recently, I think a group out of Penn said it can actually maybe disruptive of your sleep. So I think it matters on the individual, the volume of the noise, et cetera, et cetera. Their concern in particular, I think, was maybe that REM sleep in particular was being impacted by it. And then supporting physiology through diet. Avoid heavy late night meals. A little snack's fine maybe, but not a late night meal. Limit the caffeine and alcohol. I know myself personally with the caffeine around 2 p.m, this will be my last of the day. Fiber-rich Mediterranean style diet, and then certain things that you can maybe have in things like hot tea, chamomile, lemon balm, lavender, mild relaxation support. So let's look at an example of that. Here's the natural lifestyle sleep intervention I'm looking at in my laboratory. Aerobic exercise as a sleep-based therapy. So aerobic exercise definitely improves sleep, okay? It's been shown to deepen the slow wave sleep that I told you about, the delta sleep, that's so important. It strengthens the circadian rhythm stability, increases the slow wave delta power, in particular sleep duration and melatonin rhythmicity. And this makes sense too. Just think about it for a second. If I have a day and I'm just being lazy around the house, at the end of the day, when I go to bed, it's not maybe going to be the smoothest transition to my good sleep, right? But if I go run a 5K in the morning and then you look at my sleep that night, odds are I'm probably going to go, more straight into that good deep sleep. So, it's intuitive that we have here that this benefit from aerobic exercise. Now, exercise has been shown to enhance cerebrovascular perfusion, so that's that lymphatic flow, getting the toxins out, and it supports metabolic recovery. As well, when we were talking about neuroinflammation, exercise reduces this pro-inflammatory cytokine signaling, and it takes down the inflammatory burden in general. So the idea, for instance, if we want to look at TBI again, but keep in mind, when I'm bringing up TBI, it's just an example. Any one of those psychopathologies, you could probably be throwing some of these techniques against. So in traumatic brain injury, there's accumulation of those very toxins we're talking about. These phosphorylated tau, maybe even beta amyloid. Excuse me. You certainly see disrupted sleep in the TBI, and then you certainly see cognitive problems, neuroinflammation, etc. So we just went over exercise. It's a physical activity. It enhances that lymphatic flow we want to enhance. It improves that deep, slow wave sleep, and it stabilizes their circadian rhythms. So if we improve the sleep and then we look at the recovery, maybe we can get better quality and duration of sleep, improve lymphatic system function, reduce cognitive impairments, and maybe diminish that neuroinflammation. And that's what our laboratory is doing in mice right now. We're actually doing voluntary exercise, aerobic exercise of the animals. We're going to compare it to animals who don't have the access to these wheels that they do the exercise on. And we're going to see a difference, not only in the sleep, but the improvement of the outcomes that you may see that the injury causes when it comes to symptomology. Okay, so that's another good break point, I think, before we go to the last bit of slides and questions. So if there's any questions here, we can certainly field them.
Yes, Dr. McKenna, we actually have several questions in the chat,
Great.
showing a lot of interest here. So I'm going to go to the next question. Have you found an influence of video games on sleep disturbance? If so, how long before sleep is it suggested to turn off technology?
What a great question. Part of the reason why is I've personally experienced it. Through the years, I am a gamer. I will share that with you now. And I realize with certain games, I need to give myself an hour or two before going to bed. Otherwise, I'm a little hyped. And what's the reason why? Well, when we're just talking about things, stress wind down routines. Well, if I'm playing Fallout, I'm not winding down my routine. I'm getting amped. Okay. I'm kicking in, certain types of maybe, stress hormones even and whatever else. The whole idea for you to get the good sleep is you got to bring down your stress hormones, your activation of locus coeruleus as noradrenergic release, and maybe even a little surge in cortisol. That's the last thing you want right before going to bed. So it's just a funny question because I had to, take a dose of my own medicine, I would say around 3 or 4 years ago. It was during COVID, actually. And I realized, if I want to get to sleep at a decent time, I can't be getting all charged up. Now, it doesn't mean I don't play video games. It means I don't play them till 10 or 11 at night. Okay.
Okay, we have another question from Lori.
Mhm.
Can you speak to jerks in sleep for adolescents, particularly when falling asleep?
Well, we all jerk a little bit first off. Now, there's levels of jerking. And so the idea is this, with REM sleep, you get into a state which is called muscle atonia. It's one of the characteristics of REM sleep. And it's a good thing to have in the sense that from the neck down, your voluntary muscles pretty much are, I don't like to use the term paralyzed, but they don't work. And that's probably good because otherwise you may start acting out dreams. And that is another disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder, where individuals don't have the muscle atonia necessarily. They're in the dream state and they literally start thrashing and yelling, et cetera, et cetera. So as you go into sleep in general, there is some jerking that occurs in, certainly I've had it as adults and all. That's relatively normal. Now, if it gets to more extreme levels, that is something where speaking to it, I mean, certainly you can start talking about things like, periodic limb disorders, restless leg, et cetera, et cetera. These are the types of things that I would feel less comfortable answering. And the reason why is some of these are pretty serious diseases. For instance, restless leg syndrome. Restless leg syndrome is quite associated with later development of Parkinsonian. So I'm not that comfortable. I'll give you a little bit of information, but just to say I'm somewhat hesitant to really give you a full picture of my thoughts, because if you're talking about a particular case and if it's something that is disruptive and unusual, it's something that should be seen by a clinician.
Dr. McKenna, did you want to take one more before continuing with the
Sure, I
question?
think, yeah, no, good timing. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Next question is from Gail. How important are dreams, and do you recommend any books that can help with interpretations?
Well, so it's great. I teach a sleep, dreams, and consciousness class to the master students once a year. And when we get into dreaming, there's so much to it. Books about interpreting dreams, I don't really believe much about dream interpretation. What I do believe is constant themes that you may see across individuals. And do they mean things? They may mean things, but not literally. They may mean things in the sense of, well, if you're seeing a lot of dreams that seem maybe stress related, maybe that's reflecting stress in the individual who's experiencing them. And that I would go with, okay? Especially because one of the roles of REM sleep, one of the main roles may be consolidation of emotionally laden memories. It's an affective memory consolidation. So there maybe is some truth to, and there's so many theories out there. Why do you REM sleep, et cetera, et cetera? There may be some truth that these dreams are maybe serving a purpose. Now, if you go back years, my previous supervisor, who I went to Harvard to work with initially, was Bob McCarley, and he and Alan Hobson figured out what's called the activation synthesis hypothesis. And this is the idea that when you're in the dream state, different parts of your brain start firing again. And we know that because there's a narrative of sorts going on. But it's bizarre. Why is it bizarre? Because there's one area in the brain that isn't active like when you're awake, and that's your prefrontal cortex. So if your prefrontal cortex, what's its role? Attention, executive control, whatever else. If it's not holding back those reins on this ascending information, the net effect is you get the bizarre narrative that you may see in such things as dreams. Now, there are all sorts of other dreaming and REM sleep theories out there. And, there's been a lot of back and forth in sleep research in general about it. For a while, there was the idea that it's kind of like a sandbox where you can work out your emotions, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to recommend anything that's for dream interpretation per se. But there are a number of scientists, say like a Bob Stickold or a Matthew Walker or Carlisle Smith, and if you want to hear someone counter argue some of their theories about REM sleep, you can go to Jerry Siegel or Bob Burtis or whatever else. They've been fighting a lot in the field back and forth, proponents and opponents of these different REM sleep theories. So I would say you could look up some of those names, and always just a good general Google search usually gets you started. But when it comes to literal interpretation of REM sleep, I'm not really a believer of it. Okay, anything else before we move on?
There are other questions. I just didn't know if you wanted to finish
Let's
up
move
with
on.
your slides. Okay.
Let's
Okay.
move on a little bit. Okay,
Okay.
so we went through these natural sleep optimization, but as we know, there's other ways to optimize sleep, right? There's clinical and technological sleep enhancement. You may be somewhat familiar with clinical, maybe less so with the technological sleep enhancement. But the idea is to amplify, stabilize non-REM sleep, and promote all those good things I've been telling you sleep does. So pharmacology. Well, certainly, there's dietary supplements, and I'm guessing there's probably a question or two about them. Things like melatonin and magnesium glycinate. These are just examples. There's more. There's new drugs on the market now, things like dual orexin receptor antagonists, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute because I've done some work on them. There is actually melatonin receptor agonists. So these are actually, compounds that are developed by companies that, act more cleanly than what you would get from a melatonin supplement. And then there's the classic short-term hypnotics that you'll hear are, somewhat prescribed out there, your Zolpidem, your Zopiclone, et cetera, et cetera. The thing about those hypnotics is, it's maybe not, you may want to veer from just relying on those as like going forward for the rest of your life as the way you go to sleep. And you may want to approach it differently. There are some implications with these hypnotics. For instance, the sleep, when you actually go and do EEG and look at it, doesn't look that great or as good as what real good sleep looks like. And there's always that hangover next day effect. That's a worry that you're kind of have this continued sleep inertia into the next day. And that's one of the things about those dual orexin receptor agonists right above I'm talking about supposedly address those issues. But here's some of the cool stuff coming out, the neuromodulation. Closed loop acoustic slow wave stimulation we'll go through. So the idea is you can get wearables. They're recording in real time what's going on during your sleep. And when it knows in your different stages of sleep, it may start doing things back at you. And things like that can be such things as sensory stimulation. Low frequency, slow wave transcranial stimulation. So that's something we just talked about, right? The idea that you have this slow wave that's so important for sleep. So maybe we can magnify it. Maybe we can amplify it. And then there's this thing that I'm going to talk about that happens during wake, that subsequent sleep will show an improvement, and it's called 40 hertz sensory entrainment, GENIS. Now, one thing, kind of what I was just talking about is this precision monitoring that we have the ability of now. Now, when you get to the point of having wearable sleep tracking, there's two levels of it, really. There's one that can break out, are you in wake, are you in non-REM sleep, or are you in REM sleep? The more powerful wearables that are coming out now are actually looking at your brain waves, and that's where you can get key findings. But first, let's talk about clinical sleep intervention. So this is the hypnotic improvement of relapse behavior in the withdrawal period following opioid addiction. So withdrawal states can trigger things like hyperarousal. Certainly, it's been shown that sleep, that deep restorative sleep is going to be impaired. And in general, all these different things, the hyperarousal, the horrible sleep, whatever else, what do? They're going to contribute during a withdrawal period to you possibly going back to the drug. It's going to destabilize that recovery. You may relapse. So these DORAs that I was just describing, so the idea is that you have this arousal orexin system, and these are antagonists, so we're bringing away the arousal. These selectively are going to block the wake-promoting orexin signaling, and this is going to reduce the arousal, not too much heavy sedation, especially compared to the Z drugs we were just describing, and preserve more natural REM and non-REM architecture. So, opiate addiction, we have the disrupted sleep and circadian disruption, intensify withdrawal symptoms. The DORA-22 treatment, before I used it in this, I used it in other studies and just evaluated it as a hypnotic, and it looked darn good. It reduced sleep disturbances, better quality and duration of sleep, and restored circadian stability, so a good readout. And then with our new study that we're running up now in mice, we found after opiate exposure and looking at the withdrawal period and giving them the DORA, we found things like less drug seeking, less stress and irritability, more sociability, and decreased probability of relapses probably as a result. So the DORA-22 treatment, that's a hypnotic to fix the sleep, downstream started helping with all these different symptoms that we're worried about in withdrawal. And what's so important about those symptoms is they feed back to increased probability of relapse. Okay, so that's a good example of the clinical sleep intervention. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the great details of oscillations. I think we'll be able to just follow along. This is where, if we had more time, I would go through. I just want to get you through what is this exciting thing, the technological, non-invasive sleep intervention. Let's first talk about GENIS enhancement. So, your brain pretty much has these ensembles of neurons that like to fire at certain frequencies. And we've already been talking about one. That was the slow wave sleep we see, right? The delta activity, 0.5 to 4 hertz. That's huge for restoration and maintenance. While you're awake, there's another important range. It's called gamma. Okay, it's 30 to 100 hertz, cortical regions, and it plays all sorts of different roles. We think in cognition, binding of sensory stimuli to make a whole of what you're perceiving in the environment. It plays a number of roles. They think this is how the cortex, the cortical regions talk to each other. Okay, so we did some work years ago, out to more recent work actually, on this gamma band activity in the animal models. So a group at MIT, led by Dr. Tsai, I think around 8 years ago, developed this technique called GENIS. Previously, in the field, we had this treatment called auditory steady state stimuli. And the idea is if you had different animal models, and this was seen in humans too, with certain types of disorders, if you gave the external stimuli at 40 hertz, and this was an auditory click, you would see a gamma band response that would be diminished in these different psychopathologies. So they think this is a reflection of a problem with cortical architecture. Now, we don't need to go too much into detail about that, but the next step was what Dr. Tsai's group originally did here. And what they did is they decided to see if this could be a treatment. Can you elicit these gamma band oscillations and see improvements? So what they did first in animals, and now they have a company called Cognito Technologies or Therapeutics, where they're developing this. So what it is, it would synchronize 40 hertz light and sound during the day while you're awake, can then train these gamma band rhythms, okay? These are the rhythms that are essential, like I just told you, to the attention and the executive function. So this is getting your cortex pretty much primed. And then just keep in mind, disruption of this coordination is seen quite often with cognitive instability, such as we see with these psychopathologies. They showed that this GENIS reduced inflammatory markers, beta amyloid plaque burden in rodent models of Alzheimer's disease. Wow. And cognitive dysfunction. You may have seen those same models. So all of a sudden, we're like, oh, wait a minute here. So these gamma band oscillations, if you do a certain treatment, now these treatments are rather long. It's like an exposure of an hour a day of this flashing light and these sounds, and you have to do them over months, but they are doing clinical trials on this right now in Alzheimer's patients. The idea is this, though, it's non-invasive, and this neuromodulation platform and different variants of it may have a really strong translational potential. So this group looked at Alzheimer's disease, but let's go back to traumatic brain injury again, okay? The idea, you got your disrupted sleep, your cognitive dysfunction, headaches, depression, lymphatic flow is slowed down, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these wearable protocols, headsets, et cetera, et cetera. In turn, it will enhance the lymphatic system. It may promote slow wave sleep that we want to be doing. So, but overall, you get better regulated sleep, improved mood regulation, increased clearance of these toxic proteins in the brain. So this is a question we're tackling right now. Does GENIS treatment during the day enhance the following subsequent later sleep regulation and in turn improve those symptoms we're talking about? The mood, the brainwaves clearance, and the cognition, such as what you would see in TBI. But not just TBI, it could be a number of one of these illnesses. Now, one more point of enhancement, and this is something I wasn't even aware was on the market until a month ago, are non-REM sleep enhancing devices. So just now we were talking about, these devices, they enhance gamma bands during wake, subsequent sleep looks good, but this is going at the sleep now. So it's been shown by a few groups that low frequency transcranial electrical stimulation at that slow delta, 0.5 to 4 hertz presentation during non-REM sleep can maybe enhance non-REM sleep. Make it better, make it deeper, etc. So what they've done here, and here's two example companies, one being NextSense and the other one being Elamind. They've shown that closed loop acoustic stimulation delivered precisely timed during the deep sleep to what's going on with your actual delta wave without disrupting the sleep architecture, which is my one question about, does it disrupt it or not? Will actually promote the slow wave activity, promote all these benefits we've been talking about with sleep. So the idea is literally, for instance, with the Element is you have a headband, it's getting your EEG readout in real time, and it's actually going to zap auditory stimuli to amplify your actual delta wave. Now, this is not an endorsement. I don't know too much about the literature behind this, but what a very cool idea. Okay. So these non-invasive approaches are scalable, they're bedside compatible. There's potential to really support brain health with them and strengthen, the restorative sleep that we've been talking about is so crucial. So this is definitely an exciting new avenue that's just come on my radar around a month or two ago. So let's just summarize what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll take some more questions. So what we talked about, sleep, hopefully I'm convinced it's not a passive state. It's biologically active. It's serving a number of functions and purposes. And these functions and purposes, certainly improve emotion, cognition, and brain health. In our lab, what we're trying to do is evaluate some of these interventions and, develop even these interventions to target core brain mechanisms. And the thing is, just keep in mind, sleep is multi-domain. We aren't going after one symptom. We're going after a core neural mechanism that may benefit a number of the symptoms, these disease symptoms. Now, this work creates a lot of opportunity. I just showed you an example of something that's very consumer related, but opportunities with federal funding, agencies, digital health, therapeutics, wearables, neuromodulation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Strengthening sleep can make psychotherapy and medications work better. So the idea that maybe some of these various sleep interventions can be worked with as a self-implementation or in conjunction with other things that are regularly used to treat psychiatric and neurological disorders. And then what's the goal? Why are we doing all this? To really inform that long-term goal of, the practical, personalized brain health platform that's really targeting the idea of healthy sleep and why it's important. So I'll leave this up here, and I'll take some questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. McKenna, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank
We
you.
actually have a good amount. It looks like about 10 questions in the chat. So maybe we can
Mhm,
just go in order down the line as they came
mhm.
in. The most recent one since our chat about about dream interpretations was asking if our thoughts contribute to psychopathology and how might that relationship look?
Are thoughts contribute to psychopathology? I'm not sure what that question means. Now, I think you can maybe flip it and say you can certainly see evidence of things like psychopathologies in our thoughts. It's not really clear what that question means. Am I getting it
Totally
wrong?
understood.
Okay.
Brooke, if you wanted to elaborate on that question again and maybe clarify in the chat, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be
But
great.
our next question is how does this chat on sleep might relate to ADHD?
It's a good question. So there is, we just listed a bunch of psychopathologies. ADHD in particular, I think is been shown to be definitely associated with certain types of sleep disruption. So again, if in yeah, I'm just trying to remember because in particular there's a link of ADHD and particularly apnea in children. That's very fascinating, but I'm not going to go down that road. Let's just stick to where we're on, which is the idea that with ADHD, you're going to have sleep disruptions. So maybe you could see some improvement in things like, say, cognition and attention if you start addressing these sleep disruptions with these different interventions. So, I could certainly see that. I mean, one thing that's been shown over and over again in sleep research is sleep disruption and sleep deprivation in animals and humans. The consequence is huge when it comes to things like cognition and attention and all. And it makes sense. It makes common sense. If I'm going to be up all night and next morning I'm going to be having to do a task that's going to be very attention demanding, et cetera, I'm probably going to perform kind of poorly, right? Now, if you have a more chronic state like ADHD, being an actual, disorder, and you see these sleep consequences, it would be maybe very helpful to do different things to address, or I would say at least go for those lifestyle interventions I talked about. really regulate your sleep, make sure when you're going to sleep, it's a proper environment, whatever else. Now, again, going back to the fact that I'm a researcher, not a clinician, if it's excessive sleep difficulties, of course, go see a physician and have it taken care of, addressed. Okay, thank you. Next, Lily.
Absolutely. Our next question reads, how do you get back to sleep when you awake in the middle of the night and cannot return to sleep for either minutes or even hours?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is something that you see a lot in people who are aging, me included, that around 5 or 6 years ago, all of a sudden, 3:30 or 4 in the morning, there's this awakening that's occurring. Now, how do you tackle it is a good question. So trying to relax and put yourself back to sleep is possibly the first thing to do. But with an excessive time point of, say, over 30 minutes, if you're trying to do that, you may actually want to get out of bed a little bit and be in a very, calm environment, going back to those lifestyle pointers I just brought up, and then try to calm yourself down and bring yourself back to bed. Now, in general, why are you seeing that as you age is particularly stress hormones and other things are kind of spiking at that point. So, your cortisol, for instance, should start, early morning rising, but that kind of creeps more into the latter part of your sleep, as in, earlier in the morning as you progress with age. So this is one of the main reasons, and I think it's one of the main things that you see in adult sleep that may be a complaint is this maintenance of sleep. So it's not even an initiation of sleep. You can get to bed. It's the fact that you get up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning. Now, again, if you work with, say, a certain sleep specialist or otherwise, I wouldn't call them tricks, but way to treat it, or at least things to consider. One thing I learned is have a pen and paper by me next to bed and write down what's worrying you. Okay. In particular, I found this helped me with at least initiation of sleep. That, my mind's racing, so many things, worrying about work and whatever else. How am I going to relax and get to sleep now? Well, it actually helps to have it written down next to you. Just write it down, get it off your chest. You aren't going to forget things because that's part of the worry probably is that you aren't going to address these things that are stressing you for one reason or another. I have found that personally helpful as well. Okay,
Great. We do have several other questions.
sure.
The next question is, do we have high quality evidence-based interventions for all of the common sleep disturbances?
Um, hmm. Yes. Um, what's high quality? I guess is the thing. It matters on the interventions, Let's take apnea, for instance. Okay, we got obstructive sleep apnea. CPAP seems to be very effective. The problem with CPAP, compliance. Half the people don't want to wear the mask all night. But what's coming in the horizon now for apnea, for instance, is maybe actually finally medications. We got the GLP-1 agonists that are coming out now, which certainly the idea is that if you have, excessive weight around your throat, that's causing the closure. Maybe the GLP-1 agonist will bring down the weight a bit and you have less closure. Even more now, I just read something in Lancet, I think last night, that they're looking at anti-seizure medication that may be helping bring down the AHI index for sleep apnea. I know there's a company called Apnimed that I think Andrew Wellman and some of his crew developed out of Harvard. They have a pill that's, I believe it's a noradrenergic reuptake inhibitor, anti-muscarinic. So it really, that's just an example of one particular disorder that's sleep related that, there maybe are some treatments, but every treatment, there's always this, like with the CPAP, there's always a but, and then there's the next step to get the treatments to be more improved and, get more compliance out of patients and eventually, hopefully, take care of the problem. So it's another 2 or 3 lectures to get through all of these different diseases and high quality, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly, there are medications out there, but I'm personally the type who is like, well, maybe before going to medications, try these other things. And certainly with something like insomnia, definitely try CBTI if it's really an issue with you. Definitely find, some sort of clinician who can work with you on that.
Okay, the next question. Can poor sleep contribute to sudden and rapid drops in blood pressure for a 79-year-old adult?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm a physician, and that I'm not a physician, and that one, if you're worried about that, you need to talk to your physician. I'm sorry.
Okay, moving on. What's the trick to avoiding sluggish behavior next day after daylight savings time?
Good question. So, my field, we have a general understanding we should be at standard time and stick to it and not be shifting back and forth. I refer you to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine as well as the Sleep Research Society and their individual statements. Regardless, we have it right now. So the other day we were dealing with it, and twice a year we deal with it. What do you do? Zeitgeibers. That's your main trick. I think the idea with Zeitgeibers, we talked about the main one being the light in the morning, that's blue heavy, that gets you up. And the other end of it, you want to turn off those Zeitgeibers to actually get the melatonin levels to start rising and you go to sleep. But there's other Zeitgeibers. And these are the things to consider, say, if you're traveling across time zones as well. Your timing of when you eat is huge. So, if you want, maybe a day or two before that standard, the change of time zone, you can maybe shift your meals by a half hour, hour. So it doesn't impact that as much. And you may hit that rhythm a little better too. And then as well, the idea is when you actually put yourself to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these different cues in our environments, these Zeitgeibers that you can maybe be, subtly shifting. So when you finally get hit by daylight savings time or something like that, it's not as hard of a hit. Now, on the other hand, keeping that in mind, when you say, for instance, travel across time zones, that's something you could be considering too. Things like, oh, maybe start eating dinners earlier and earlier and earlier from my usual 7 p.m. time because I know I'm going to be somewhere else. All of a sudden, the 4 p.m. is going to be the 7 p.m. when I eat dinner. That can help maybe too. And also, if you do want to take a melatonin supplement or something else, those are other things that maybe you want to play with the timing as well.
Okay, Dr. McKenna, we are coming close to 2 o'clock. We're going to take just one more question.
Sure.
Does brown noise help with sleep or is white noise better?
Good question. I'm most familiar because I've been reading up a bit on pink noise, actually, which is the lower frequency range. Um, I'm not going to talk about each one being individually better than the other because I think it really matters on the individual and what they've tried and what seems to work out. There is a general perception, though, that all of these different introductions of noise while you sleep may be actually disrupting sleep and not helping it. Now, I think it matters on the individual myself. And, one of the things that you have to be considering first off is the volume of the noise. If you're using the noise to cut out other sound in your environment that is disruptive, well, you may be bringing that volume up a little high, and that in itself may be disrupting such things. And most recently, I did read up on pink noise, and there was concern that in particular it was maybe disrupting REM sleep. So I think it really matters on the individual, but keep these things in mind. Like, maybe earplugs and a mask would maybe be a better idea than introducing something new, being a noise into your environment. On the other side of the coin, though, it does help people, okay? Especially with their sleep. Okay, it looks like we're wrapping up here.
Well, we are, and I'm going to ask one last question. So when you did your undergrad, was that in neuroscience or what was
My
your?
undergraduate was at Chicago in behavioral sciences psychology. Then I went to Florida Atlantic University and got my PhD in complex systems and brain sciences, which is fancy neuroscience, I guess. It's a little more complicated, but we don't have the time to go explain complex systems right now, certainly.
Sure.
Yes, and then my postdoc work was in sleep and circadian rhythmicity and neuroanatomy, neuroscience when I was doing my postdoc at Harvard.
Wow, very nice. I was thinking about it because I was in Tokyo and Seoul, and then I was in Chicago, and then I just came back from Kansas City, and wow, I'm so
Yeah.
excited I got to sleep last night. But as you're talking about all this, and I know we've got a wonderful neuroscience program, What do you think about what's your perspective on students that want to pursue a career in neuroscience?
Oh, well, there's a reason why I did it. It was my first semester in grad school. I was in just a general psych program before I went to the complex systems and brain sciences, and I took neuroscience with who became my mentor for my PhD, which was Bob Burtis. I decided, I've been exposed to enough sciences that this was a science that we were not going to conquer in my lifetime. There's so much ample opportunity in neuroscience to try to get to the bottom of things, so many things we don't understand, so many fascinating things. I decided, okay, this one's not going to keep me bored, right? This one's going to keep me on my toes, and I dove in. I've been happy since. I mean, the bottom line at the end of the day is the intrinsic drive to try to figure out what's going on when it comes to neural circuits, behaviors, and particularly with me, the consequences that you see with some of these disorders.
Certainly, with all the demands that are out there and our exposure to data and technology, we really need to take care of ourselves. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
and I want to follow that, but with one last thing about a study that came out the other day where everyone's worrying about the blue light with their adolescents, and that's what's keeping them up at night. It may be stress. It may just be straight stress. They did a study, they took away the blue lights, and the adolescents are still having a problem getting good sleep, and they think it may be just underlying the stress in this present environment of one sort or another. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. I think we're all going to take a walk now and
Yes.
enjoy nature. How about that?
Before it rains, get some sunlight.
Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you, Christine.
Sure.
Thank you, Lily. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will post this within a week on our website, nova.edu/sharkchats. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me again, Dr. Perez and everyone. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. McKenna.